Chapter 65 Pasts of Dawn EP15. Oh, my brain stalled. The current situation alone screamed that lying to him would be a very bad idea. But the idea of giving too much away filled me with almost as much dread. How much did he know? How much could I conceal? If I said too much, it'd give him more than what he had and what I needed to survive this situation. But not enough. And it'd be a goner. I am not one to repeat myself. The Alpha's voice was deceptively even, masking the certain impatience that was prickling beneath his skin. His son chimed in, apparently not as versed in the art of a cool exterior. Speak now, or we'll make it so you can never spew your lies again. The Alpha's annoyance at his son's words was understated and would probably manifest later in a stern lecture delivered behind closed doors. But his glare remained trained on me as I finally spoke. Not many werewolves can recognize the scent of a siren. Not many werewolves have lived the life I have. What had he seen that left him with the knowledge of who Sirens were? The possibilities were endless. And yet I couldn't think of a single one that would make a werewolf as aware as he was of the existence of Sirens. And what life is that? His eyes narrowed. One of many experiences. But life stories are shared between allies. And you are anything but that. I hope to change that. That all depends on who you prove yourself to be. My arms widened in a gesture of openness. I'm sure you'll find that I haven't told a single lie. A curt, harsh sound. Be that as it may, the absence of lies does not equate to the presence of truth. I cocked my head and dared a small turn of my lips. Maybe not, but the truth can only exist within the absence of lies you've said it does not equate to. If that is so, then why does a lone wolf carry the scent of a species no one had heard from in over a decade? Just because you don't hear from someone doesn't mean they're dead. A dry thing, though sometimes it's better when the world believes you to be gone. His eyebrows raised at that. Interest peeked under his stern, stony exterior, so they're not entirely gone. Relief. It crouched in the light softening of his expression, and hid in the hope his voice carried, try as he might to conceal it. And it shone a ray of hope for me too. Maybe I could leave this pack with more than just my life. I can't presume to speak on behalf of all Sirens, but I chanced to smile. It imagine that depends on who you prove yourself to be. We can't very well expose us to enemies after all. A hint of a smirk. Touch. Ignoring his son's knotted brows and questioning gaze. The Alpha summoned my jailers back into the room with his alpha voice. Take her to our guest quarters. She shall stay there till Carl awakes and either confirms or refutes her claims. Till that happens, she will be monitored like she's guilty, but treated like she's innocent. Is that clear? Many, TAs in particular, of their faces screamed that it was not clear, but their mouths all chanted the same. Yes, Alpha. His gaze turned on me as he addressed me next. The content of our next conversation will depend on your guilt or innocence. For both our sakes. I hope it's the latter. It will be. He said nothing, and I was escorted to the guest quarters through a series of passages and halls. The room they took me to was part of a suite, with an adjoining bathroom and sitting room. The accommodation was certainly welcoming, even if their venom-filled expressions undercut the atmosphere. Over the next several hours, they took turns watching me, offering me food and drink as they stared at me like they hoped to choke on it. I politely declined for a while, before my stomach won over. Even still, I sniffed everything thoroughly for a hint of anything remotely poisonous before consuming it, and made sure to only take a bite or sip, then wait 10 more minutes in case anything happened, before continuing with it, with the minutes trickling into hours, and the hours eating up the rest of the day. I tried to get my mind to stop its turmoil. Kasia and Haley would likely start getting worried, and it'd be just my luck if Timothy returned after days of his prolonged search, only to be met with my absence. I glanced down at the mark on my wrist. Telepathy would have been such a useful special ability right now, as opposed to a fire could barely control, and ice that was apparently non-existent. The sun had long since set, when I got any news of Carla's condition. It was Tase, who had coincidentally been permanently stationed outside the suite, whether by his request or at his superior's initiative, which was all the same, since it kept his contempt away from me too. Shush up. Evidently less aggressive now that he knew she was all right. Time to see if you're Elia or not. Before long, I was led back to the imposing doors of the Alpha's office. They swung open and we were met with the father and son, in addition to a young girl of 13 or 14. The bandage around her ankle, as well as the situation, told me she was Carla. So, the Alpha said once the doors were shut, this time with my jailers inside the room. This is the she-wolf that claims to have found you and brought you back for treatment while you were unconscious. I would like your side of the story. Carla only stared, mouth slightly agape in wonder in her eyes. She looked so young and innocent, and it struck me that while I thought of her as a child, I was probably just 2 or 3 years older than her. I offered her a small smile and she blushed, her mouth snapping shut as she looked away. She didn't hurt me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I was already dizzy and limping through the woods when I saw her wolf, and I was the one that approached her. She was just drinking from a river when I came out of the bushes. You would not lie about this, would you? She shook her head vehemently. No, Alpha. His face relaxed into a smile. Thank you. Carla, we will look into how you got injured and bait poisoned berries, but that will be a matter for another time. Go get some rest. Yes, Alpha. The doors were open for her and she left, accompanied by a smothering, flittering Tase. She gave one last glance behind her as the doors closed again. Now, he said, resting his back on his seat and beckoning a chair to be brought in for me. It seems we have much to discuss. It would seem so. I took a seat. Achidi taken care to select a chair with the same height as his. How about we start with what you know? I met a Siren once. He began, the very memory of this mystery woman blanketing his features in fond remembrance. He narrated the story of who she was and how he came to cross her path. As part of his training to become an alpha worthy of his pack, his own father had arranged for him to live in different packs of varying size and influence. All his father had done was confirm with other alphas to accept his presence, but the logistics of getting to these different locations was up to him alone. In an added test of his resourcefulness, on his journey from one pack to another, HED made stops and used routes that werewolves would not typically frequent. And so, HED met her. Her name was Diane. A wistful sigh under his words that made me wonder about his relationship with his mate. Behind him, his son was shooting him confounded looks, his mind no doubt on the same question as mine. He continued, both mine and his son's curious concern flying over his head in the face of the memory of Diane. They met on a beach in Miami. Achidi picked up a bartending job in the area to SC Rouge to gather some money for transportation to the next pack. And she'd been there, sitting at his bar. The way he described her told me that even if HED eventually grown to love her, her allure had definitely been what initially drew him to her. Instead of heading straight to the next pack as intended, Achidi decided to linger in hopes of having more time with her. Achidi already secured a job and a strict timeline hadn't been set for his travels, so staying hadn't posed much of an issue. From the moment we met, I knew there was something different about her. She was mesmerizing and she made me feel like I was the only man in the world. It was till she needed to leave that she told me the truth of what she was. From the way he spoke, I wasn't even sure if meeting his mate would have been enough to make him leave her if she hadn't disappeared. Why did she leave? The bittersweet fondness on his face turned more bittershin. She never said why exactly. Just that it was an emergency and she needed to return to Sierra Lena. She said she'd just be gone for a week, 2 at most. Then a month passed with no word from her. But I couldn't afford to stay there for no reason, so I had to leave Miami for my training to continue. While I continued my travels, I tried to find more out about Sierra, and to even see if it was possible to go to Sierra Lena. The few people I came across that had ever met a Siren said that the ones they knew had disappeared too, sometimes with the man that they loved, sometimes without him. As far as I know, you're either first one I'm aware of in about 16 years. When learning about the jam, what Sireness had named the period of time that the way to Cyr and Lena had been closed off, lasting from my birth to when I'd given my blood to make it possible for Sireness to cross between Cyr and Lena and Earth again. My teacher had mentioned that disturbances had been noticed in the portals on the state of Cyr and Lena had given them signals that something was amiss. As a precautionary measure, Sireness who didn't live in the safe zones or close to Siren communities on Earth had been called back. That had been to keep them safe, so none of them would be stranded where vampires could get to them. Should anything happen, hearing of how my birth alone had been enough to separate families and keep loved ones apart for more than a decade and a half always made my stomach curl in on itself and my blood run cold. So I must ask, how is Cyr and Lena? And how are you here? Hope hung in his words and filled his eyes. I shook my head apologetically. I've never been, so I can't tell you. I was born here. My father is a werewolf and my mother was a Siren, but she also disappeared when I was young. I didn't mention that she disappeared long after his precious Diane had. His shoulders slumped and his disappointment was palpable. So you're a werewolf, but your mother's genes show up partially in your scent and in your hair. I nodded. In that case, I guess you wouldn't know much about Sireness in general. It must have been hard to grow up without your mother. Thank you for your compassion. It wasn't easy. My nerve twisted. And my father was abusive, so that didn't exactly make things better. I'm sorry to hear that. I pulled myself up to my full-seated height. My head held high. It's okay now. I escaped. And I'm working to make sure hell know that he couldn't break me. The pity in his gaze gave way to something akin to respect. How do you plan to do that? The only good thing that can be said about him is that HES an alpha. He didn't deserve the title. A terrible one, but one nonetheless, meaning I have the capacity to become one too. I'll use the only good thing I ever got from him and create my own pack. I'm not the only person H is abused and someone needs to stop his reign of tyranny. If that's the case, why not just challenge him? Surely, if H is as bad as you say, the royals will have no problem recognizing you if you beat him. It was rarer these days, but werewolves were allowed to challenge their alphas for the position if they felt their current one was inadequate. The biggest issues stemmed from getting the rest of the pack to accept you if you won, and getting the royal werewolves to recognize your victory. I didn't tell him that the rest of the pack was just as bad as him in my eyes, or that I intended to take them all down together. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love Tales, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I don't think I can win with just myself. He regarded me, probably calculating the likelihood of a girl like me winning against what he probably imagined to be a grown man. Well, it is important to know your limitations. That's part of being a leader. He considered for a moment, then clapped his hands together with the finality of a decision being made. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love Tales, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Why don't we become your ally when you create your pack? Chapter 66 Closer Natalia SB. Oh, Via didn't want to believe it. Unless the pack you escaped from is one of our allies. I'm sure we can be of help. I doubted it. It's the Lightwood pack. He shook his head, disgust briefly crossing his face. No, that's definitely not a pack we associate with. I wrestled with the grin threatening to invade my face and willed my heart to slow its pace. I would definitely appreciate your help, but I'm not sure of what I could offer you with your standing. Larger packs didn't typically ally smaller ones, or even currently non-existent ones in my case. Sure, I'd hoped to find stronger allies than the victims of the Lightwood pack shenanigans, but I'd known it would be a sizable hurdle to cross. I hadn't hoped to stumble into a golden alliance like this. I know a strong alpha when I see one, and having ties to another species is beneficial, no matter how estranged you may be from them. Having grown up without your mother, the same disgust peeked through his features again, lingering a bit longer this time. Besides, I've never been fond of them. And just like that, the pack that I was yet to even create was an ally of the second largest one in the country. We finalized the details of our collaboration. I informed him about Timothy, and how he was meant to be believed to be the alpha instead of me. The idea of a secret alpha greatly amusing him. He had the idea of officially becoming allies on the first day of the next winter werewolf ball, which would garner plenty of attention. I loved the idea, and with the more minor details to be left for when we actually became official allies, I was free to leave their territory. Thank you so much. I bowed my head to him. No need. We are allies now. I look forward to seeing the kind of leader you become. A VRL. I was escorted to the edge of the territory. The atmosphere of my departure in stark contrast from that of my arrival. Once at the edge, I said goodbye to the guards and began to make my way back. After about 10 minutes of walking, I noticed Kaisha and Haley's scents, and not long after, I was face to face with the both of them. Haley barreled towards me with a hug. Oh my gosh. Ari, we were worried sick. I'm so sorry, guys. I told them once you released me. There was this wolf that came from nowhere and passed out in front of me, so I had to take her back and then. Kaisha continued. And then the pack thought you'd done something to her, so you had to wait till she woke up to confirm your innocence before they let you leave. I blinked. I made Haley undetectable so she could do some recon, instead of just rushing in guns blazing to rescue you. She explained. Since neither of us think you're in the habit of knocking girls out for sport, we decided to let things play out and see what happens. Haley nodded. I wanted to get you out of there pronto, but Karshan made the call to just watch. And I'm so glad she did. I can't believe you managed to get such a massive ally. I could barely believe it too. The Scorn packs were one thing, but teaming up with the Clone Un pack was, as Haley had said, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Not to say that I hadn't believed we could accomplish what it set out to do a year ago, but I'd very much expected to have to make some sacrifices for my goal. But this made it feel tangible, like I could almost taste the satisfaction of spilling Clark's blood already. All that's left is to go get our members. Since Kaisha and Haley had already picked up my things on their way, she decided to teleport us back to the house. Timothy yelped, holding his chest. Where were you guys? I had to climb in through a window, and I'm sure that was a fun show for the neighbors to watch. Kaisha snickered at the image while Haley, her mood having notably shifted at the sight of him, wordlessly vacated the living room. As I explained everything to him, Timothy had a glint in his eye that I was almost certain reflected my face too. This might turn out better than I'd let myself hope. A wicked half smile on his face, with a high of the golden egg of an alliance. I realized that Timothy's presence here must mean that Hed found the sanctuary. You said you wouldn't come back till you'd found it. His half smile morphed into a full one. Well, I'm back. Aren't I? Damn. Today's a good day. I enter it. Kaisha said from the fridge as my own wicked grin beamed. This is better than good. This is monumental. Things are finally shifting. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. With something of a giggle, my body heated up, but not in the panic-inducing way I was used to. I took a gamble and let the flames burst from me in little spheres that swirled around me almost like excited Sprite. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Timothy gaped, while Kaisha, who emerged from her rummaging through the fridge, looked on in a mixture of awe and pride. How are you doing that? Haley's voice came from behind me. I have no idea. I was feeling warm, so I just let it out. I guess. I responded, watching the flames dance around me. I knew negative emotions made my ability flare up, but I'd never experienced this with positive ones. Maybe because you've never let yourself feel this positive this strongly before. Candy suggested. If she was right, it wouldn't shock me much. The idea of my strongest positive emotion having anything to do with the lightwood pack left a whisper of dissent that settled in my belly. I shook my head and the fires flickered out. I had demons to slay and a pack to destroy. So of course I'd feel happy taking a step closer to crushing them. Let's go get our members. Hayley SP. I emerged from my room at the sounds of fascination and fire. Ari sat on a couch as at Tin, orbiting her as if she were a celestial body. I'd seen her practice with her fire before, but had never seen her doing anything like this. How are you doing that? Then started moving around the couch so I could see her face. I have no idea. I was feeling warm, so I just let it out, I guess. Looking just as fascinated as the rest of us, with the little fires floating around her, her gorgeous hair, and the glow over her eyes. She was positively ethereal. Then a look of dissatisfaction crossed her face, and she shook her head, the fires flickering out with the movement. Let's go get our members, she said with a slight hardness that made me wonder if I should be worried. While Timothy was raring to go at her call to action, Kaisha pulled the brakes. How about we go tomorrow? I'm sure both of you are tired from your adventures and my magic could use some time to recharge. Neither of them put up any fight at the suggestion, so it was settled on that we'd leave for the sanctuary tomorrow. Get some rest. It'll be a bit of a journey, Timothy announced as we all retired for the night. The Airbnb we got had 3 bedrooms. When Timothy had been away, Ari had slept in his room. But since he was back, she stayed with me instead. Are you excited about tomorrow? I asked as we settled under the blanket. Her expression was a mixture of things I couldn't quite put my finger on. But she smiled. And a little nervous. Don't worry. Ari, I'm sure you'll have people lining up to join our pack. We might even empty out the sanctuary. She laughed at the idea. I hope you're right. I know I am. Just get some rest and we'll go, put our best foot forward tomorrow. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilbay, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Good night, Hayley. Good night. The next morning came and the heavenly smell of her East cooking coaxed me out of bed into the kitchen, where she and Tim were, already showered and fully dressed. Good morning, Hayley, she greeted with the flip of a pancake. Good morning, Ari. I glanced at the dining table, where several Lycan Tupperwares full of food were cooling off. What's going on? Well, Timothy floated the idea of packing some food for the trip and I thought we could take some to share with some of the wolves at the sanctuary. She replied as he moved over to a different pot and grabbed some more Tupperware. My nose wrinkled at the fact that it'd been his idea. But it was admittedly a good one and would probably help our chances with the people at the sanctuary today. That's a great idea. Need my help with anything? She shook her head, handing Tim the food chest just packed to place with the others on the dining table. No, I think we're good. Thanks though. You should probably go wake Kesh up so the 2 of you can get ready. Don't forget to wear something comfortable and maybe pack something to sleep in. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilbay, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I said then went to do just that. Half an hour later, having woken Kaisha and up finished getting dressed, I stood in front of the mirror, contemplating my hairstyle. I finally settled onto French braids and was weaving my fingers through my hair when Helene spoke. So you're still not talking to Tin? I rolled me eyes. What do you think? She was silent for a while and just when I was about to ask if she was okay, she spoke. You know we can't be with Kellen forever. Right. Why not? It's kind, caring, and most importantly, not a hole that pushes me away 1 minute then expects me to come crawling back the moment he decides to get over himself. It's not the one for us. I finished off the second braid and tousled the wisps of hair escaping near my ears. Well, Tin should have thought of that, huh? Especially before he basically called me an attention whore to my face. She sighed. Yes, you're right. But I also think we should maybe give reconciling with him a shot. It's not like he hasn't tried. And your refusal to acknowledge his existence kinda makes things awkward with everyone else too. She was right in that he definitely tried to bridge the gap. But I wasn't ready to give him the time of day. The less I interacted with him, the less I'd be reminded of those awful things he told me, and the less it'd relieve the feeling of everything I hated about being my own. I'll try to keep things less awkward. I conceded. I'd definitely seen Ari and Kaisha share uncomfortable glances on more than one occasion, but I won't be anything close to friendly. She sighed, but the conversation stopped there, so I took that as her dropping the topic. By the time Kaisha and I were done, Ari and Tim had everything ready to go. With the beautiful spread of her gourmet food and her magnetism, our chances of gaining new members were looking pretty good. I can keep these in a storage till work close, so we don't have to carry them all the way, Kaisha said, waving an arm over the containers of food. They vibrated for a few seconds, so fast that I thought they were about to explode, then faded out of existence. Tentatively, I placed my hand where one of them had been, feeling nothing. Impressive, Ori commented, while Tim gave her a pat on her shoulder. Outside, I saw that Ari had done more than just make food. She had also packed some camping gear for us. 2 foldable tents and for sleeping bags were rolled up tightly next to 4 large water flasks. Tim moved to carry them, but Kaisha waved an arm over them, casting the same spell she had earlier. Once Kaisha had masked her scent, it didn't take long for us to depart. We trudged through the woods, Tim leading the way, since it had taken him several days to find the sanctuary. I knew we were in for a long journey. Most of the journey was uneventful. When Kaisha brought up how long Tim had been gone and joked about not trusting his navigation skills, he explained that most of his trip when searching for the sanctuary had been spent going the wrong way and assured us that we'd be there by the end of tomorrow. The problems came when night fell. We'd already set the tents up and were sitting around the makeshift campfire Ari had lit for us, finishing off the food shed made for us earlier, when the topic of sleeping arrangements came up. I don't think I can stay with Timmy tonight, Kaisha said, before anyone else could give their suggestions. I know he turns in his sleep and I need my beauty sleep. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, Ari said, drawing the word out. She looked at me, likely searching my face for the visceral discomfort that twisted in my core. But I smiled. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Keeping the quake out of my voice, I told myself I'd be civil, and had already succeeded at making things consistently uncomfortable between the 4 of us for weeks. Kaisha needed her rest, likely so that she could use her magic properly tomorrow, and I needed to suck it up and deal with the proximity to him, sleeping next to him, in a tent, for the entire night. I could handle 1 night of dealing with him. I continued, hoping I sounded nonchalant and not deeply shaken. Are you sure? His voice uncharacteristically soft. I turned to him, keeping my gaze on his forehead. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I nodded. I don't love it, but it's just 1 night and we'll both be in sleeping bags. Okay, I guess it's settled then, Kaisha said, the empty bowls vanishing from her and Tim's hands. Just let me know when you're to finish eating, so I can send your bowls away too. I'm gonna go get ready for bed. She got up and padded away to one of the tents, unfurling her sleeping bag inside it. Wordlessly, Timothy got up to do the same in the other tent. At some point, the 2 of them wandered off to the nearby river with their toothbrushes. Once they were far enough away, Ari spoke. You know, I could stay with Timothy if you're uncomfortable. Cheer's the biggest and I'm the smallest, so IDD probably make more sense space, wise to. I shook my head. Seriously? I'm okay. She raised a brow. I'm serious. I'm not thrilled, but I figured that my avoidance of him has already made things difficult for everyone so far, so I'm manning up and dealing with the fact that we're all on the same team here. She still didn't look convinced, but her brow lowered, and she took the last bite of her food. I just hope you know what you're doing." Then she went off to get ready for bed. I hoped so too. Chapter 67, The Sanctuary Heili SP. By the time Kasia and Timothy were back, I'd already finished my food, drank some water, changed into my pajamas, and was wrapped up in my sleeping bag. There was some chatter when they returned, but it didn't take long for everyone to retire for the night as I heard ruffles on the zip of the other tent closing, and then I was suddenly hyper-aware of him, of his movements as he walked over to our tent, of the heavy sigh he gave before climbing in, of the warmth emanating from him as he climbed into his sleeping bag next to mine. I was as still as an etched lake through it all, my back to him and my sleeping bag cocooning me. Outside our tent, crickets and critters conversed in their nighttime sounds, but in our tent, silence reigned. Good night. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Suddenly, softly, like he was sure if I were still awake, a beat passed. Then I whispered back, "Good night." More silence. Try as I might, I cowled in sleep. It felt like my entire being was on high alert with him so close, coiled to pounce or retreat. I didn't know. "I can't sleep," he said after some 20 minutes. "And your breathing hasn't changed, so I guess you can't either." "No," I sighed. The movement of his sleeping back ruffled and I was aware of his heat getting nearer. When he spoke again, his voice was closer. "I don't know what Kasia is up to, making us stay together. But why did you agree to this?" "I figured it couldn't be worse than the last time we were left alone together," I replied without thinking. He sucked in a breath and I sighed, then turned to face him too. I decided to try. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Not meeting his gaze, I've been avoiding you and I know it's made them uncomfortable, so I decided to try. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He said softly, then paused, looking unsure of himself. "I'm sorry for those things I said." I bristled, but he continued, "You had every right to avoid me, and it gave me a lot of time to think about how things went down. I was Utaline and me listening to my fears since we met has been unfair to you. I just want the chance to make it up to you. If you let me." I finally let my eyes meet his. They were earnest and unguarded, imploring me to accept his apology. "You were so Utaline." He nodded. "And rude." He nodded again. "And you hurt me." Then nodded once more. "But if I have some time, I think I can forgive you." Hope bloomed on his face and my heart squeezed at the sight. "Take all the time you need. Sunshine." I allowed myself to smile. Then thoughts of Kellen invaded my mind. Sweet Kellen, who still blushed every time I looked at him. Who listened to me whine on and on without so much as a yawn. Who loved to bring me little trinkets from his dad's shop that he tried his best to bend into shapes and animals. Who brought me food whenever he noticed any change in my mood. Who had nervously asked to be my boyfriend just last week. Who had said yes too. My smile fell. "I can forgive you," I said around the dryness of my mouth. "But I don't know if we can be together." The earlier hope on his face faltered, sputtering into disappointment. The urge to argue, to plead, was there in his eyes, in the furrow of his brows, but he just took a deep breath and gave me a smile that made my heart squeeze in an entirely different way. "I can wait." I gave him a feeble nod and we exchanged goodnights again, turning our backs to each other. I fell into a restless sleep. When we'd woken up, we'd been facing each other again, our faces mere inches apart, but it determined not to let that make things awkward, and it seemed he'd drawn the same conclusion. By the time we got to the sanctuary, the energy between us was notably different. There was a longing every time he looked at me, and I no longer shied away from him completely. It was lost on me that every time we interacted, Kasia looked intensely pleased with herself, while Laurie just shot us curious glances. But it was all forgotten once we reached the sanctuary. Remember, Ari had told us as we approached. We can go for 10 signatures, but we just need 6. Make sure they know what they're getting into, but don't mention who we're up against. We don't know if the information will reach them if we say their names. If you'd ever imagine a town of tree houses, you'd have been able to predict what the place was like. Platform and tree houses interconnected above us. Nothing but ropes and ladders built into the trunks to get to them. Some structures and tents were on the ground, along with a small clearing with a canopy tied to the nearest trees housing sacks of ingredient, pots and pans. Werewolves of all ages and backgrounds moved around deftly, obviously at home here. After we'd been inspected by the nearest guards, Ari and Kasha had broken away to go talk to other werewolves about joining us. Tim and I had approached 3 werewolves, only managing to get to NOS and 1 maybe after explaining our goal and inviting them to join us. "Is that you?" a voice called, quaking with emotion. Almost statuesque, I saw a kaleidoscope of emotions prance about on his face. Grief, relief, guilt, and then finally one that shortened of prick led at my heart to see him feel tenderness. Then he breathed, turning slowly to look at the girl that stood behind him. At the sound of her name from his lips, she raced over and captured him in a hug that pinned his arms to his sides. He wiggled his arms out of between them and wrapped them around her. His embraced ender and fierce all at once. I averted my gaze, my eyes looking for anything to put my attention on other than the sight of him like this. They eventually released each other and proceeded to chatter on. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered, sounding like she was speaking around a lump in her throat. Tim held her hands in his eyes searching hers. "I had to stay away. It was just safer for you that way. I guess that's just his playbook for every girl. Stay awake, or it's dangerous." I suppressed the urge to roll my eyes, my internal sarcasm so potent that I was glad I hadn't blurted it out. She shook her head, her curls swaying with the motion. Tears made her eyes glossy. "I grieved you." He hugged her again, and I suddenly found some interest in the ladder on a nearby tree trunk. They'd really done a good job of keeping them sturdy. "I'm so sorry I put you through that, Pen. There were some fucked up people after me, and I really needed to make sure you were safe. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." She exhaled and pulled back, her eyes roaming his face as if to take every feature in. "All that matters is that you're here now." "Yes, I am." Caressing her cheek. "But I can't stay." She pulled away, taking a step back as indignation filled her face. "What? I just got you back and you're already telling me that you're going to disappear. Again. I have 2 Pen. I can't go into details. But I'm working on something, and if it works out, I could get just as far back. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Can what happened to them will not go unpunished. I'll make sure of it. She didn't miss a beat. I want to help. Absolutely not. There's a reason I had to stay away and am not taking you anywhere near it. That's not a choice you get to make, she retorted. They stared each other down, the atmosphere around them static with tension. I needed to get out of there. I'm gonna go talk to some more people. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. My legs already carrying me away from them. You two should catch up. He barely even looked my way, only deigning to mutter a distracted sure, his gaze still locked in hers. "Kellen," I reminded myself as I approached another werewolf. "Kel is my boyfriend. This means nothing to me, if you say so." Arcadian drawled, the pity in her voice apparent. "Natalia SB. Oh, V walking into the sanctuary. I didn't know how to feel. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Nervousness and the desire to turn around melded inside me. None of them dominant for long enough for me to be able to tell which I felt more. After passing the inspections and confirming that we had permission to scout new members for our pack, we decided to move in pairs to cover more ground. After reminding them of the numbers we needed, Kasia and I went into the trees while Haley and Timothy stayed on the ground. They deepened strange, interacting more than they had over the past few weeks. Haley had called me, giddy with excitement last week, when Kellen had asked to be her boyfriend, and since our phones weren't getting much service out in the woods, I knew she wouldn't be able to break up with him till we returned, if that's what she decided to do. But the carefulness between them told me that maybe she'd decided to choose Kellen over Timothy. All of that was pushed to the back of my mind though, as Kasia and I pressed on. It had her cast a spell to suppress my allure, and my concealment kit was in full effect, though I had just my persuasion skills to rely on. Most of the werewolves we approached were open to the idea of joining another pack, as new as it was. What they weren't as open to was the idea of having to go up against another pack. I couldn't blame them. Werewolves were community creatures, and the whole point of being in a pack was safety, security, and connection. Throwing revenge into the mix, especially for werewolves who had been in danger enough to need to come to the sanctuary in the first place, wasn't exactly an attractive proposition, though I was surprised when, as Kasia and I were going over our failures while seated free platform, we were approached by 3 werewolves. 2 of them were guys. Their shaggy, long hair pulled back in low ponytails. The brunette had some of his hair free from his ponytail, obscuring part of his face and hiding the eyebrow beneath, while the black-haired one looked older, wary of life and on edge. The lady with them was petite, barely reaching their chests, and deftly used her crutches to keep pace with the men beside her. Kasia and I shared a look as we got to our feet. "We hear you're looking to start a pack and you need some members," the woman said. We nodded. "We also hear that you're looking to bring justice to some pack that's abused their power." It hardly call what I planned to do to the Lightwood's justice. It was more like pure, unadulterated revenge. But I nodded all the same. "Who's gonna be the alpha of this pack of yours?" the eye-patched brunette asked. I lifted my chin and met his eyes. "I am." They all looked skeptical, but the older man continued. "You're an alpha, no doubt from your scent, but are you strong enough to handle what you're planning to do?" My lips widened in a grin. "Why don't you find out?" Ipto laughed, a hearty sound that made his shoulders shake. "That's a challenge, little lady." I cocked my head to the side, sizing him up, more like an invitation. He laughed again. "I like her." The older man shook his head, while the woman regarded me evenly. Her gaze was piercing, like she was boring a hole into me and peering at my soul. No doubt, she'd find nothing but burning hatred and barely controlled rage if she could actually see it. "There are many here who crave the safety of a pack once again," she said finally. "There are also many waiting for an opportunity to right some wrongs, ourselves included. They will all follow you, should you prove yourself worthy of it." I nodded. It survived beatings and withstood torture. It had the ire of an entire pack determined to break me bear down on me all at once. It'd been ridiculed and belittled and treated like less than gum on a shoe. I knew I was strong, but was I strong enough to protect others? How do I prove myself a capable leader and protector? That's easy. You fight, and you win. They pitted me against a people. One was a bear of a woman, with scars that crisscrossed up her exposed arms and an X marked on her cheek. The other was a burly man missing his middle fingers on both hands, who looked enough like her to be considered her brother. When Kasia had protested against the fact that they were making me fight people, Aipja had scoffed, saying that an elf ought to be able to fight regular werewolves 2-1. This logic was new to me, but then again, I suppose alphas needed to be stronger for a reason. "You may use the clearing and this portion of the trees," the woman, Margori, had explained, her gait brisk as she outlined our arena. "If one of you crosses the bounds, you're out. If one of you loses consciousness, you're out. If one of you forfeits, you're out. Ari, you only win when both of them are out. Are you sure this is fair? The man. Daniel. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Fingering his brass knuckles nervously as he echoed Ka's OU sentiment. I know she's meant to be an alpha and all, but isn't she a tad outmatched? Yeah. Daniela chimed in with an entirely different tone as she eyed me gleefully, tossing her axe from one hand to the other. Fighting just one of us should be more than enough for her. I met their concerns with a wry smile. A year of proper nourishment and my uncovering had taken my body out of the rickety, malnourished own. I was sure I looked like a fawn to them. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Margot called. The crowd that had gathered to spectate cheering for the siblings and amused used as a backdrop to her fight. For such large people. They moved quickly. Daniel charged straight towards me, all earlier apprehension having evaporated with the call to fight, while Daniela curved around, her axe ready to strike. I readied the forearm, length dagger had been given, avoiding Daniel's blows with slight movements, and avoiding getting hacked by Daniela. They moved with so much unison. I was sure they'd fought together for years. Daniel would come in close with a flurry of punches I had to avoid if I didn't want an nasty bruise. Then he'd fall back in the same split second that Daniela would strike. His last, second withdrawal nearly making me a second late to dodge her blade. With my newly uncovered senses, I was able to track their movements easily. But had this been a few months ago, my coordination may not have been able to keep up with the speed I needed to avoid them both. After a few minutes, I got used to their patterns, so the next time Daniel fell back, I swiftly moved in with my dagger and slashed at the handle of Daniel's axe with as much force as I could muster. It underestimated my strength, so the attack left me unbalanced for a second as the rest of Daniel's axe flew to the side, lodging in the ground with a thunk and leaving her holding just a stump of wood. In the second it lost balance, Daniel swooped in, landing a blow in my side that had my breath hushing out through gritted teeth. Forging through the pain, I immediately grabbed his arm and pulled him in, the both of us tumbling to the ground. Before he could get the upper hand, I locked my arm around his trunk of a neck in a chokehold and my legs around his torso, managing to trap one of his arms. His weight bore down on me as he clawed at my arms with his free hand to get me to release him. I refused to relent, only tightening my hold when Daniela started on me with hits of her own. I didn't let go till I was sure he'd passed out. Then I rolled out from under him, in time to avoid the punch she had aimed for my head. My arms were bleeding, and my side still stung, but I jumped to my feet and brushed her with my dagger. She avoided most of my slashes, but I pressed on, refusing to give her an inch of ground in the fight. We were approaching the line in the sand marking the bounce. She seemed to realize this too, because she abruptly spun off to the side, risking a slash that caught her in her side. I rounded on her with a kick. She managed to block it, but the force of it sent her skidding back several feet. When she lowered her arms, her eyes met mine and her mouth widened in a twisted grin. "Oh, I like you." I met it with one of my own, then rushed back in. Whatever counter she had in store for me met her as I dropped to my knees at the last second. Slicing her thighs, my momentum helpfully slipped past her. She growled in pain, which continued into an actual growl as she shifted. When I looked back at her, I was faced with her wolf. She was quite as big as Helios or even Timotheus, but I was sure that what she lacked in size shared more than make up for in viciousness. I needed to end this quickly. Snarling, she raced to me, and I ran headlong to a tree. When I was close enough, I pushed off with all the strength I could gather in my legs and leapt, reaching the platform above with a single jump. As wolves, it wouldn't be easy for us to climb trees, so staying up here would have forced her to shift back. But I didn't wait. Almost as soon as I was on the platform, I dropped back down, landing on her back and wedging my dagger into her shoulder. She let out a howl and thrashed about, rolling around in an attempt to shake me off. I held on, even as I felt the bruises and scrapes forming from the impact of her tossing herself to the ground with me still clinging onto her. I yanked the dagger out of her shoulder and buried it in her other one, earning more howls and violent thrashing. I took it out again and buried it in her side next. Her howls grew sharper. Finally, as she tried to slam herself to the ground with me on her back again, I rolled away, getting not a crouched position when I was far enough away. It took her some effort to get up, and winces of pain punctuated her every movement. She turned to me, her snarl full of violent promises as she got her teeth in me. She charged. When she moved in to bite, I held the dagger out in front of me, bracing the blade with my other hand. She pulled back just in time to stop herself from chomping on the blade, receiving a gash to the side of her snout instead. I moved in, ignoring her claws nicking my flesh and grabbing onto her as I used my momentum and strength to toss her as I could. She skidded to a halt and turned back to me, gearing up to attack again. "Stop," Marjorie bellowed. She moved over to me, and when she was by my side, she took one of my bloody, bruised arms in her own and raised it. Daniel has been knocked out and Daniela fell out of bounds. Ari wins. The crowd was silent for a second. Then they cheered. Chapter 60, The Palace. Natalia Espy. Oh, Irvi. My chest heaved as I looked around at the crowd, the sound of my own heartbeat rushing in my ears muffling their cheers. Marjorie announced me as the winner, then promptly released my hand, shooting me a curious look as she glanced at her red palm. With the adrenaline from the fight, my skin must have heated up. I shot her an apologetic look as I tried to calm myself down. I was just grateful that I hadn't set anything or anyone on fire. Before I knew it, Kaisha and I were sitting at a table, attending to the small queue of werewolves wanting to join our pack. "We need to do something about your wounds," Kaisha insisted, for the 5th time after it explained what our pack was going to be doing to the 7th person. "I'm fine," I groaned. "I heal quickly. Besides, it's good for them to see me in this state, to know that I'll get bloody and dirty if I need to." She sighed, then put on a smile to attend to the next person in line. By the end of the day, we'd gotten 9 upfront sign-ups. 7 people who vowed to join once the new members were fully settled and gave their feedback after a month, and 13 willing to seriously consider joining by the end of the year. Daniel and Daniela had been among the 13, stating that they enjoyed the fight and would like to serve under a scrappy alpha like me. In their words, Aipja had joined up front, which surprised me for some reason. I noticed that a girl with light brown skin, thick curly hair and a determined expression had marched over to the table, after having what it seemed like a heated discussion with Timothy in the distance, expressing her very poignant desire to join after a month. One glance at Haley, who'd tried her best to look aloof and like she wasn't watching, told me that our new pack may be in for some drama somewhere down the line. "This is Timothy, a founding member of our pack," I told the group of 29 that had expressed interest. "For those of you joining immediately, organize to have a shuttle bus drive you to our pack in 3 days. That should be enough time to get your things together and say your goodbyes." I'll let Timothy describe the meet-up point. As for those that want to join after a month, I'll let you all come to a decision on the date you want to be picked up. You can contact either Karsha, Timothy, or myself with the date. If any of you can accompany those joining now to the meeting point, it'll be better, so you can guide the rest when a month passes. Two people volunteered, one of them being the girl from earlier, so I continued. And for the last category, those that LL join as time goes on. If you'd like for a bus to be sent for you too, you'll need to be 6 joining at a time. Otherwise, the location can be given to you and you'd unfortunately have to make your way there on your own. With all that being said, welcome to the Venga or Sanguine Pack. By the time Timothy had finished describing their meetup location in great detail and we had fully introduced ourselves to everyone, night had fallen, so we spent the night in the sanctuary. I finally allowed Karsha to take a look at my injuries, and while she didn't heal them fully, she did get them to the point where they didn't sting. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, We freshened up and were knocked out for the night, each of us exhausted in our own ways. When the next morning came, we were up bright and early, and after we'd said our goodbyes, we set out. The journey back both dragged on and flew by, and by the time we were crossing the threshold of the house, none of us were particularly chatty. We each shuffled to do our own things. Hayley passing out on the couch, Timothy dropping into his bed without bothering to close his bedroom door, Kaisha going off to, in her words, soak away the journey in a bath that I eventually had to wake her fund, and me sinking to the ground in my own room after organizing the bus over the phone. I fell asleep like that, with my head lolled to the side and my phone in my hand, sitting on the floor. The next day, Hayley and I had packed our things and were on our way back to the city. Kaisha had decided to stay and help Timothy relocate our new members, so just the two of us returned. On the journey back, Hayley was abuzz about Kellen, gushing about the take he planned to take her on, and how romantic he was and how much he missed her. I had yet to meet this guy who had seemingly swept my sister off her feet, but he seemed to be doing a good job of keeping her happy. If only she didn't have a Timothy-shaped cloud over heart. It'd seen what having a mate had done to my sweet sunshine of a sister. How their fundamentally different approaches to love had hurt them both. And I saw how desperately she was clinging to Kel, and in spite of it all, perhaps even because of it all, it made me wonder if it ever let myself get close enough to someone like that. If it ever let myself be so vulnerable with someone that the very thought of them not reciprocating left me crushed. I hadn't loved Kellum. I hadn't even liked him. But because the culture of mates meeting and falling hopelessly in love was so pervasive, some part of me had expected my mate to care for me. Whoever HE'd turned out to be in that wretched pack. I resented that idea now. Because maybe, just maybe, I might be left that place sooner if that part of me hadn't been holding out for a fictitious love. With a lull in the conversation, I gazed out the window, my mind wandering to the life partners Sear and Scott. According to the syllabus, we were meant to go into more detail about life partners over the course of the next 2 sessions, but I knew the basics at least. Sear and Ness only got the ability to detect who their life partner was at the age of 19, but from what I'd heard, many went decades before ever meeting theirs. I wasn't quite sure how one could tell who their life partner was, and, truthfully, I hoped I wouldn't need to worry about having to identify him either way. But realistically speaking, it seemed unlikely that I'd never get one. I was a hybrid in every sense. A full werewolf and siren, wolf and abilities and marks and all. So by that logic, if I'd gotten a mate, a life partner wasn't entirely out of the realm of possibility, unless my makeup dictated that they were one and the same in the person of Callum. I just hoped that was the case, as opposed to the alternative of having to deal with yet another man foisted upon me by destiny. Hayley spent the night when we returned home, then promptly left to be reunited with her beau the next day. In her absence, I packed and prepared myself for the journey to the Royal Werewolves would embark on tomorrow. "Are you sure you should be going alone?" Candy asked as I zipped my suitcase closed. "I don't want to disturb Hayley while she's with Kellen, and Timothy and Kaisha have their hands full with getting our members settled." "What about Kirsten?" I shook my head. "It's not time to recall her, and I can't have anyone knowing of her ties to me. You'll just go alone, I guess. But do you have to meet with them on the 9th? "Yes. I need our formation date to be the same as when I left the Lightwood pack. Besides, I've already set up the audience with the royals through the wolf net for that day. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." She conceded, not sounding at all right with the idea of me going by myself. But it had to be done, and it had to be done tomorrow. Did I feel anxious about a meeting with the royals? Definitely. Would I have preferred to go with Timothy at least? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. But I was a royal in my own right, an uncertain, uncrowned, unknown one, but one nonetheless, and I cowed and cower at the thought of facing my equals. An idea formed in my mind. checking the time to be sure super banking wouldn't be closed. I left my house, opting to run. It didn't take me long to get there, and I walked into the familiar doors with a wave to Melody. "Is Mrs. Burton in?" I asked as I approached her desk. She should be finishing up with a meeting about now. "Is anything the matter, Natalia?" she asked with a slight bow to her head, the subtle show of respect she had adopted since she cowled and referred to me by my title. "No, I just want to ask her some things. In that case, you can wait for her in her office." "Okay, thank you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Then made my way there. He'd been waiting for about 15 minutes when Mrs. Burton returned. "Natalia." "Hello," she greeted as she walked in, her smile as warm as ever. "Melody says you have some questions for me. You don't normally come around this soon after a trip. How was it, by the way?" "Hello, Mrs. Burton. It was very productive. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You'll be taking another one again tomorrow. This time, to the Royal Werewolf Palace. That's why I wanted to talk to you." Her brows climbed as she took her seat opposite me. "That's interesting. What do you want to know?" "What's the Siren's relationship with werewolves?" "It's quite neutral. We don't relate with them much, so we don't have much of an opinion on each other." It made sense. Werewolves were pack creatures, but not very open to outsiders. We just didn't have many chances to interact with other supernatural races. So there shouldn't be anything preventing us from forming an alliance with them. She shook her head slowly, processing the idea. "No, not that I know of. I could do this. What if I facilitate an alliance? In a hybrid of both? Who better to get the two of us to be allies?" She thought for a while, the contemplation on her face heavy. "This is a massive move. Natalia, you're not yet queen, so I'll have no choice but to run this by the High Court, especially the Council. Besides, from what I understand, werewolves are a race that values strength. As much as I hate to admit it, Sireness are seen as a weak race in the wider supernatural world, since we're the only ones with a clear predator. Alliances are a balance of give and take, but I struggle to think of what we could have to offer them, or what we could even want from them too. But wouldn't the fact that we're allied help our standing? I suppose it would, but I struggle to see what we could offer in return." She was right. Werewolves did value strength, and as a race of mostly women who had spent centuries in hiding, Sireness weren't exactly considered a force to be reckoned with. And as Mrs. Burton had said, it was hard to think of anything we could offer werewolves that would have them want to associate with Sireness. "I guess you're right. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." It really thought the idea could work. Her expression softened. "It's a lovely idea. Rebecca knows we could use some friends in this world, and he'll be willing to help you pass it through the High Court if you think of any way it could work." Grateful for her offer to help. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She was always looking out for me. She must really have loved Mum to be so kind to you. Candy mused. Thanking her, I left her office, waving goodbye to Melody on my way out before returning home to finish preparing for my trip. My stomach was in knots. I was drawing closer to the palace, accompanied by a guide that had been sent to take me to the palace as it was my first time visiting, and I could already see the spires towering above the spruces surrounding us. My audience with the royals was scheduled for 3 p.m., but my anxiety about missing it made me plan to arrive for hours early. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Tyler walked on ahead, holding my small suitcase in one hand as he narrated the history of the palace and the surrounding woods with hearts in his eyes. I listened obstinately, clutching my papers to my chest as my eyes darted around. Eventually, we approached the palace and I had to remember to keep my jaw from hanging open as I followed the guide around on his offered tour. It was massive, the main building looking to be 8 stories high and composed of 2 wings attached to the main, long structure that absolutely dwarfed the 3-tiered fountain in front of it. Off to the side, sprawling gardens populated with flowers of a myriad of colors spread out, leading to a hedge maze that I could just tell was designed to keep you wandering for hours. It took us a while to get around the main palace, and when we did, we were met with what looked like a smaller castle made of what looked like glass. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love Tales, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, and metal. The mid-morning sun glistened off it as we walked by. This is where the summer mate ball is held, Tyler explained. Then he went into a monologue on the history of the stunning structure. Around the other side of the palace was a stable and training ground, as well as what Tyler described as the ground servants' quarters. He led me through a door in the right wing. According to him, the right wing was for the political and official activities of the palace, the left wing was the residence of the royals, and the main wing was for everything else, including the winter mate ball. Once inside, I was stunned anew. The ceilings were high, littered with chandeliers that had been polished to perfection. To Tyler's words, the halls felt extravagant, but professional all at once, with painted portraits of historical figures lining the walls, punctuated by paintings depicting savage battle scenes, majestic wolves, and the moon in all its waxing beauty. We climbed several grand steps, and I was led to a room on the 3rd floor. You may wait here till your audience. The room has everything you need, including food in the mini fridge in the bathroom, but do not hesitate to ring for one of the servants by pressing this button. He gestured to a button on the wall above the bed. I will return to fetch you 45 minutes before your audience. You are also permitted to explore the grounds on this wing, but you cannot go beyond the 4th floor, or to any of the other wings. I nodded and he placed my suitcase down near the bed. Is there an iron here? I packed my outfit for my audience in my suitcase and did hate to go looking creased and wrinkled. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love Tales, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You'll take your clothes to get pressed and have one of the servants return them to your room. If you're not around, they'll just leave it on the bed. Oh, thank you. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love Tales, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Then got my clothes out of my suitcase and handed them to him. If that's all, I shall see you at 2:15 p.m. Then left the room, closing the door behind him. Alone in the room, I looked around. It was about the same size as my bedroom, and sure enough, had a mini fridge, a microwave and an adjoining bathroom. My window had a view of the stables, servants' quarters and training grounds. Looking around, the place was full of movement, servants rushing to their duties, guards patrolling the areas and others who looked like important visitors being attended to. 30 minutes of fidgeting and even showering in a poor attempt to calm my nerves passed. My clothes had been returned, pressed to perfection and brought in by a young girl who had scurried and then right back out after handing them to me. I checked the time. It was only noon, so I still had over 4 hours of nervous energy I needed to endure. I wasn't settled enough to spontaneously combust, but my fire simmered under the surface, no doubt making my skin warm to the touch. I sighed and got up, deciding to take a walk around to give myself something to do. Wandering around, I noted that most of the rooms on the 3rd floor seemed to be similar to mine, save for a room that had a large billiards table and dartboard in it. I ventured up to the 4th floor. It had fewer doors, and when I opened one of them, I saw why. The room it entered was a massive library, with rows upon rows of tomes with varying degrees of age and volume to them. I ventured in, browsing the spines and flipping through some briefly, till I found one that depicted the tale of La Luna and the creation of werewolves. I was seated on the ground, my back resting lightly against the shelf I'd pulled the book from, when I noticed a shadow over me and looked up, locking eyes with the person suddenly standing over me.